So last week we talked about a big old convoy that was headed towards Ottawa. It's changed a lot in our political climate. Canadians are split on what to think about this, the Freedom Convoy 2022. I heard the stories, heard the news about the trucker convoy that is sitting in Ottawa, blaring their horns quite loudly and raising a ton of cash, $10 million. Michael Lee, I'm
Yes,
going to
sir.
ask you first.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel? Tell me your honest opinion about this big old protest in Ottawa.
Well, I'm a little bit divided on that, only because I do understand their point of view. I do understand where they're coming from. I don't agree in the way they go about it. I don't really know what's going to come of driving a bunch of trucks into the middle of a massive city and then sitting there for hours on end, honking your horn at all times of the night. Like, what is that going to accomplish? You're just going to take away the viewpoint you're trying to make and make people see that what you're doing is just you're causing a distraction. Like you're the purpose of why you're there is being lost in the actions that you are portraying, in my opinion. Yes, we understand you want the mandates gone. You understand that you don't like the um you don't like uh the vaccination passports and you want just your freedoms back. Okay, we understand, but what is driving a truck across the country to park it and then
Blare your
I don't want
horn.
to say the word, but make people upset, all night going to do. And all you're doing, if you ask me honest opinion, all you're doing is you're hurting the smaller businesses you're trying to protect. The businesses that don't want to open because you're going to walk into there with no masks on and cause a problem for the other patrons that are there that want to respect the rules, want to respect the mandates, and you're just hurting them because now they're all closed because they're too afraid to open up for what you're going to do. I'm not really sure what else to say other than that. It's been something I've been watching, and I mean, again, yes, you're watching it from certain viewpoints and certain standards, certain newscasts that may be leaving out certain, important aspects of the whole thing. You mentioned to me before when we were talking about it that I might be looking at it as one-sided, and then that's fine. I understand, but I just don't agree with how they went about it.
Adam, how about yourself?
Well, I would just like to comment on what Michael Lee has said, and I will go so far as to agree with him in that it is difficult to get people to see your point of view when you are just actively trying to irritate them as much as you can. That being said, I do find myself in agreement with some of the principles of at least what this convoy started out to be. Whether or not it is that now, there is much debate. But I do think that the government has overreached with their mandates and their restrictions, and a lot of it seems to be rather uninformed. It's just sort of knee-jerk reactions to things that have happened to look to the public like you're doing something good. And definitely we have a group of people here who have, for whatever reason, had enough. And they are not standing around doing nothing about it. They have actually traveled all the way across the country to make their opinion known. There are certainly those among them that have latched on to this to give voice to other causes that should not be supported. But that has had the unfortunate effect of just making it very easy for the media and for other politicians to put a negative spin on this whole convoy and then essentially dismiss it as, a bunch of Nazis or whatever they have chosen to say today. which is not just, it doesn't describe everyone there. And there are certainly some people who are simply there because they are upset at how their government is treating them, and they are trying to make that known.
Excellent. I like both those points of views. What I've seen for the initial part of this convoy, when it was starting, the Freedom Convoy, as it was initially being called by the organizers, and this movement, it was pretty well, how should we say, being embraced by a lot of the population, even though our lovely Prime Minister decided to discuss it as a fringe minority. I'm sure they will discuss some views on how much of the population actually supports what facets of this demonstration. But as I see in it from the actual live footage on the YouTubes of people that were actually at the demonstration, they mostly want the mandates gone. They don't care about whether someone's vaccinated or not. They're not a bunch of anti-vaxxers saying that people shouldn't be vaccinated. They're just saying that people shouldn't be mandated. And that was the main story that I heard from the majority of the protesters last weekend, Saturday, when there was thousands and thousands of people there. It was shortly after that Saturday that we seen some images of one or two Nazi flags that were straight up Nazi flags, and one or two, and probably more, Nazi style flags that were handmade satirical imagery that people were using to make a point of what they thought of this government. Does that actually legitimize the media's demonization of this protest, where they believe that just because somebody used a satirical image of the Nazi swastika, does that delegitimize the arguments for the protest?
Well, whether or not it delegitimizes the argument.
It seems like in the media that's what they're trying to say.
Well, if you take a Nazi flag out there and wave it around, satirical or not, you are making it very easy for the media
I'm saying,
to delegitimize.
Yeah. There was only a few images that I was able to pull up on Google, but I'm saying the people who take a Canada flag and put a image of Justin Trudeau on it and an image of a swastika on there, to make a statement that maybe he's being a fascist. Does that delegitimize and does that go to support the argument that they're saying that there's some kind of anti-Semitism just because they use that symbol?
That's tough to say. I'll tell you, I wouldn't do it because I don't think it gets your point across. I think it just makes the vast majority of people discount what you're saying. Because it's really easy for them to just call you a Nazi, and then they don't have to care what you think after that, because Nazis are bad.
Yeah, I do think that it's not the best imagery to use. But
do you think, though? Sorry to cut you off, but do you think, though, that those people are just the people who are using those images are more or less just using it because they have a platform now to use them on?
Sometimes, yes.
There's definitely some of that going on, yeah.
But, I mean, this kind of thing has happened a lot before with other politicians. And depending on how the news wants to tell their story, it seems like you get a different opinion on a protest, specifically when it's left or right. So what I want to know is, Michael Lee, in this last week, where did you get your news from?
I got my news from CTV News, is what I usually watch, or CBC.
And what was your immediate reaction?
Well, I mean, everything is just, it's all negative. I don't know how else to say that. And I've had that experience in the past with certain news, programs or broadcasters or whatever the proper term for them is, where, we went through a
content creators.
Sure. We went through a store closure, and, they interviewed some of our colleagues or employees at the time about the store, and they said a lot of good things about the store. But when you watched the news later on, those good things are nowhere to be seen or heard. It was all about the negative aspect of it all and saying how we got to work and we were completely shocked that it was gone and we didn't know what to do and all that. Like, they didn't say what we had said about the store, where, you know, it'd given us X amount of years and we're grateful for them and all that kind of stuff like that. And we're just, you know, trying to find out what we're going to do next.
What are you telling me, Michael Lee, that the news specifically spun the story that you had said and the facts that you had said into a specific story that they had wanted to tell?
No, that never happens.
I mean, I guess pretty much.
Pretty much that was your story. That is likely what happens. I want to ask, though, Adam, you tend to have a little bit more of a see both sides of the see both sides of the story kind of opinion. So where are you getting your information from?
Well, Google likes to feed me articles from the National Post. It has figured out that I am probably at least a little bit right-leaning, and that aligns with articles often found in that publication. I do often read stories from CBC and CTV News as well, and I can definitely identify the difference in sort of the narrative that you might see going between the different publications. And it does become clear that they seem to have some kind of agenda based on who they are, right? Where they're aligned, and yeah, definitely CBC, CTV. When you're reading about their coverage of the convoy and whatnot, it's very closed off to the idea of perhaps trying to relate with what the purpose of the convoy is, what they're protesting. You know, it tends to be degrading of the people in the protest, finding ways to sort of push them aside and not pay attention to their views. And in articles from, you know, the National Post and publications like that, they try to take more of a stance of at least trying to explain what the point of this convoy was supposed to be. And yeah, I mean, they do come with their own biases. I'm not saying anybody is completely innocent of having their own spin here. It's everyone's got their bias, and you can pick it out.
And that's a fair point. Everybody has their bias, and if people were at least a little more open about their preconceived notions of what they're trying to say, it's good, because then you can digest your news from multiple angles of a story, multiple opinions, and come up with some kind of opinion of your own, because you're hearing multiple sides of the story. I want to ask you guys, besides the flags that were there, like that weird Confederate flag that who knows why that guy was here, we're not Americans.
He's in the wrong country.
Yeah, well, the War Memorial and the Terry Fox statue was defaced. Did you guys see the horrible thing that they did to the Terry Fox statue?
I heard about it. I also heard there was people dancing on the tomb of the unknown soldier.
Yeah.
All of that is absolutely unacceptable.
No doubt.
Yes. So, did you actually see the imagery of the Terry Fox statue being defaced?
I did not.
No. Michael Lee, did you?
I didn't see it either.
Why not? Why do you think that is? We have seen in the news over the last 2 years a lot of statues, even this here in Manitoba. A statue in front of our legislative building was defaced. Adam, do you remember what happened to Queen Elizabeth?
Yeah, she got pushed over.
And her head came off.
Yes.
Did that kind of thing happen to Terry Fox?
No, didn't they just put things onto him?
Yeah, why don't you hit the Google there and see if you can find a imagery of the Terry Fox statue being defaced, because I find this a little bit interesting. Well, there we go. There's the Terry Fox being, what's the word, defaced?
Yeah, I think deface is the proper word to use.
Yeah?
And the person that put it up there says the internet is finicky, probably because there are thousands of people here, Quebec has turned it into Quebec's turned it out in full force. Updates to follow. Look what they've done to Terry Fox. Now,
Yeah.
you know what catches my eye in this picture, though? Is the anti-vaxxers part.
Anti-vaxxers part.
Yes.
Where do you see that?
Right at the bottom, one of her tags.
Hashtag anti-vaxxers.
Oh, well, that's what they're calling the protest. That's
When they
I'm not
never
surprised.
started that way.
No, but people see it that way if they have a certain perspective. So,
Fair enough.
Right. They're saying they don't want to be forced to get vaccinated, which apparently just means they're against vaccines.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's enough of that. But that's the image we see. It is a flag with some signs, and I haven't seen any painting or anything on there. So,
Does that say mandate freedom?
yeah, that's what the sign says.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought they were against mandates.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a funny comment there. Anyways, so the point I'm making here is over the last few years, when we've seen statues being pulled down, we see statues being painted in red and whatnot. Is this the same style of defacement that we're used to?
Well, no, it's not being permanently damaged. It's just you might make the argument that what they're doing is sort of flying in the face of the purpose of that monument.
True. That's a good statement. I just want to point to our lovely Prime Minister. Have you guys heard what he said after the protest?
Which one? He said a lot of
Yeah,
things.
this is a lot.
The immediate aftermath of the weekend there, he came out from his hiding with his predetermined COVID. So he had a comment that I think fanned the flames
Flammed the flame.
of division that he should have probably said something more respective as a leader and embraced, maybe not embraced the idea, but at least embraced the idea of protesting and discussed the, how should I say, discussed alternate views that people have and tried to create some kind of cohesion. There is a little montage that I'm going to ask Michael Lee to pull up in a minute. It's from a website or Instagram that was called POC for Freedom Convoy or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
And if you guys aren't familiar with what that means, it's People of Color for Freedom Convoy. That's people who are basically not white, who were at this protest, and they have been upset with the labeling of the white supremacy that was being denounced, and saying that that's not exactly the imagery they're getting from this protest. So, Michael Lee, would you please pull up this little image, the TikTok Vine or whatever it's called, of what this Instagram group has created.
Were shocked and frankly disgusted by the behavior displayed by some people protesting in our
Dancing in the
nation's capital.
streets.
Hate can never be the answer. I want to be very clear. We are not intimidated by those who hurl insults and abuse at small business workers and steal food from the homeless. We won't give in to those who
guy's
fly
giving his gloves to a
racist
homeless man.
flags. We won't cave to those who engage in vandalism or dishonor the memory
Those guys are
of our
cleaning up.
veterans. Tous les Canadiens ont le droit d'exprimer leur opinion ou leur désaccord avec leur gouvernement, mais ils n'ont pas le droit de menacer ou de harceler leurs concitoyens, ni de propager des messages de haine. There is no place in our country for threats, violence, or hatred. So to those responsible for this behavior, it needs to stop. To anyone who joined the convoy but is rightly uncomfortable with the symbols of hatred and division on display, join with your fellow Canadians. Be courageous and speak out. Do not stand for or with intolerance and hate. And to Canadians at home, watching in disgust and disbelief at this behavior, wondering how this could have happened in our nation's capital after everything we've been through, the behavior on display this weekend does not represent you. Hateful rhetoric, abuse towards their fellow citizens, there is always a right to protest peacefully that I and others will defend fully as part of this democracy. There is not a right to incite violence, perform acts of violence, or to spew hatred. And I think anyone who is part of this group who is disgusted by what their folks protesting alongside are doing needs to step up and take responsibility, condemn these actions, and look for other ways to express their displeasure. Aux expressions de haine et d'intolérance qu'on a vues parmi ces manifestants, je veux remercier la police d'Ottawa, la GRC, le service de protection parlementaire et tous ceux qui ont travaillé pour s'assurer de minimiser l'harcèlement et l'intimidation des citoyens qu'on a vus à Ottawa.
How you doing today? Doing great. How's it been down here? Nothing but good. People are super good. The truckers have been having a good time. They've been getting their point across.
How's it been?
Hey, buddy, it's been good, man. Peaceful. People are in a great mood.
That's what I'm talking about.
Always supportive of people exercising their democratic right to peacefully protest.
Much
Stay
appreciated.
safe.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe out there.
Thank you.
So, I found that good summation of the two sides of the story that is being told. On one hand, we basically have a leader in this country who is doubling down on one specific narrative and pretty much gaslighting the entire population that listens to him about what is occurring at these protests, where a lot of YouTubers are on the streets recording what seems to be mostly a Canada Day party. What's your guys' opinion after seeing the speech of the divisive leader juxtaposed to that footage that was taken from the big old protest?
Well, that's actually the first time I've seen anything like that, so I have to take a minute or two to process it and come up with some thoughts, but he is certainly just trying to paint the whole situation in the negative light. There's no acknowledgement of the people who are there protesting peacefully, as we have now seen actual footage that there is that happening. We saw police officers stating that it was peaceful, people were being good. But yeah, I haven't actually seen anything like that in the news feed on my phone, or the clips of the news that I may have seen over the last few days. That's actually literally the first time I've seen anything like that.
Miggly, is that the first time you've seen any footage like that of a peaceful protest?
Yeah, it's my first time seeing that as well. It's definitely opens my eyes and shows me a different part that I never really saw before. So like Adam said, I have to take a minute there just to kind of figure out your words towards that, because again, reading the news, hearing the news, it's not what you're seeing. Right? You're only seeing obviously the negative parts behind it all. So to see that is kind of eye-opening and refreshing, and seeing that they're actually, there's a lot of good people who are down there and are not there to, stir up any kind of trouble. They just want to be heard. And, I think it's nice that they actually took their time to go down there, travel across country, and protest like this in a way where it's peaceful, and they're not trying to start any kind of riots or whatnot.
Yeah, I want to say, last Saturday or Sunday, I was fairly interested in this, so I watched a live stream that someone was doing for a few hours there, and there was a few speeches, obviously, by that Maxime Bernier, because he has been standing for freedom for a while now, even since the last election. So obviously, his people are there, and he had a speech that was fairly interesting. But also, several Canadians, just random Canadians, were being interviewed by they were just given a platform on the back of a semi-truck, and almost anyone was allowed to tell their story about how they may have lost their jobs, even though they were able to work throughout the pandemic as a nurse. And there was so many different stories. One of them, which I found very interesting, and you definitely wouldn't hear this on the news because they're trying to portray this as some kind of racist narrative, but
Racist gathering.
yeah, despite the fact that there was a organization, specifically a trucker organization from Manitoba here, from the north, that was part of our Indigenous community down there in Ottawa. There is also a large group of truckers from another specific ethno-religious background. Michael Lee, do you know who we're talking about?
I feel like I should, but I don't.
You know, Sikhs are a
Sikhs.
large portion of the trucking population, and lots of Sikh individuals were down there. So I didn't see too much of that on the news, if any. But what I want to say,
that would be
But that wouldn't-
inconvenient.
Yeah, that wouldn't make any sense.
yeah,
They're all white supremacists.
you got me there.
Well, listen, I just want to read this article that I just found on my phone here from the National Post. I'm just going to read a chunk of it here. The title of the article is Trudeau tells other world leaders to dialogue with protesters, but he won't. And it's discussing an incident that occurred in India about 14 months ago. There were some farmers protesting some agricultural reform laws that were happening in that country. And at the time, our illustrious Trudeau was quoted in saying, "I would be remiss if I didn't start by recognizing the news coming from India about the protest by farmers. The situation is concerning. Let me remind you, Canada will always be there to defend the rights of peaceful protesters. We believe in the process of dialogue. This is a moment for all of us to pull together." So I just thought that it seems very convenient that in that moment he was all about dialogue with peaceful protesters, and now when this is happening here in our country under his watch, these people are all evil white supremacists, Nazis, and he won't meet with them, he won't speak with them, and he just discounts them as terrible people, a fringe group.
Yes, and that was a funny choice of words because the protesters actually mocked him very hardcore and called themselves the fringe minority when there was thousands of people on Parliament Hill there. It was quite a funny little mockery of what Justin Trudeau stood for and what the Canadian population disagreed with him about. One other story.
Parts of the population.
Yeah, exactly. We'll find out exactly how much in not too long, I guess, how many people actually agree or not with these specific demands that are being made at this protest. But I just wanted to tell one story that I had seen that Saturday when I was watching the protest. The platform was given to an Indigenous woman who is upset with mostly the drinking water situation on a lot of First Nations. And she was telling an interesting story. I would have loved to hear more of her story, but she was talking about how this government works with contracts, and she had listed off several acts like the Indian Act and whatnot that was all forms of contracts that the government uses to impose their will. And she was basically saying, she came off a little bit anarchist at the end of her speech, but she was basically saying that the government works with contracts, and we as a people have a right to disagree and argue with them, and protest is that form. So I found it let's say convenient that someone like her, an Indigenous woman that disagrees with the government, never even got mentioned in mainstream news when she was there telling her story. There was in this protest several agendas that were brought up that strayed from the initial point of view from this protest, which was against the vaccine mandates that they were protesting, and into several other points that, leadership in this protest should have stayed on point to be more effective. But I want to ask you guys, since you've seen the two sides of the story from what we've watched just now, there's another situation going on in terms of political protest, and that is in Alberta. Have you guys heard about this? The Coutts border blockade.
Yeah, I read about it. Has that been broken up?
Yeah, that's a funny story, but no, it has not quite yet been broken up or stopped. It has been limited because the RCMP have blockaded the blockade so that people could not get goods down to it, and the blockade has not been so far an actual blockade, because they did allow some commercial traffic and whatnot to get through. But I wanted to know, this blockade, it's a more detrimental form of protest, because if they're actually going to start blocking off borders like some places are, what do you think the Canadian population is going to think about the international trade that could be affected?
Well, the large majority of the Canadian population is going to think whatever the media tells them to think.
That's a sad situation. I compared these forms of protest to the protest we seen a couple of years ago with the pipeline protests on the Wet'suwet'en First Nations. And at that time, I thought to myself, I understand protest and the Indigenous rights that those communities need to have. But what I'm wondering is, my own personal view at the time was, the rail blockades that were occurring across the country with the other First Nations that joined in on the protest, they did quite a significant amount of damage to the trade, because the trains weren't able to get those goods across country. So when I juxtapose that with what's happening now with another protest that's not allowed to, or is trying to block off trade through an international border, I wondered to myself, like, what form of protest should be considered legitimate, and do people realize the similarities in both situations? If you were one person to say it was okay to block the rail lines and create the economic disaster that occurred then, are you now gonna shit on another protest just because you don't politically agree with them, even though they're doing a similar act? What do you guys think?
Well, people have short memories. They very quickly forget something, especially if it's inconvenient to their view that they have today.
Michael, are you familiar with the protest in there, or no? What do you think about blocking the trade of goods? Do you have any opinion on that?
I mean, blocking the trade of goods, I feel like you're I don't know what to say, you're adding to the problem, I feel.
You might be going beyond that peaceful protest at that point.
Yes, you're going to cause, like I said earlier, you're taking away the focal point of what you're trying to protest. And all you're doing is making it worse.
You're making people angry.
Yes.
They're not going to see your viewpoint.
They're not going to see the people. They're just going to see the fact that you're stopping trades and goods from going through the border and having store shelves be empty.
So do you have that same viewpoint for the Indigenous communities that block the roads or the train tracks?
See, I wasn't as educated on that situation. I'm not going to lie.
I'd like to bring up a good point here, though.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, in my digestion of the news, I was on Instagram. That was another form of where I get some snippets.
The gram.
I hopped from Rebel News, who have two people reporting inside that blockade, to CTV News, because there was a report that the RCP were gonna tear apart that blockade. Well, I wandered down the comments from the CTV saying that was what the RCMP was going to do. And you seen the expected comments that you would see on that side of information highway. And that was people saying comments like, this is good, finally, what took them so long, all that kind of stuff. And as I scrolled down, I started to see a lot of support for the that blockade and telling them to hold the line and comments like that. And I was rather surprised at the vast amount of comments that were in favor of this blockade. I did not expect to see that on the mainstream media's newsfeed comment section. But as I scrolled down, I seen one comment where a guy simply asked the question, and that was, how is this different from the rail blockades that happened a couple years ago? And you know what? A lady commented on that question, and she said, are you serious? And for one, she said this, it didn't block the trade or the transport of international goods or trade.
That person is uninformed.
Yes.
I'll tell you how it's different. One of them had trains, and one of them had trucks.
Yeah.
Mind blown.
Well, listen, on a more serious note, and in regards to that particular blockade, I did hear in one conversation earlier today that there were instances of the blockade preventing ambulances from getting through and endangering people's lives.
On the international border?
Yes. Well, in towns near that where that blockade is. Now, I can't confirm that, so I don't know that that's true. But if that is happening, that needs to not happen.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because the convoy that was headed to Ottawa specifically said that in their little news brief, that they would not stop anything like that from occurring and would do their best to assist emergency vehicles for going through. So it's possible that that kind of thing has occurred, but that wasn't specifically addressed by the Freedom Convoy 2022. So I want to move on to one other point, and that is this protest. I asked you last discussion, is it going to make a change? Well, we've clearly seen a change in the last couple of days, because the Conservative Party has started to show support, some of them, for the protesters, and are actually arguing in the House of Commons for dialogue with these protesters and for some reasonable discussion on the mandates that are occurring, or about to, are occurring, and some of the ones that they've discussed further mandates.
Was there discussion on mandates preventing truckers from crossing provincial borders?
That's what I'm saying. That's the current discussion that they are trying to further have, but I don't know if that will even fly.
Well, that seems like an intent to inflame the situation if they do anything like that.
I think that's currently what our government is intending to do.
Yeah.
But what do you guys think? Our former Conservatives leader, Aaron O'Toole, had been voted out on Wednesday.
He's gone.
Out.
Saw that coming.
I saw that coming a long time ago. I'd asked for it a long time when he flip-flopped. What do you guys think? Is this dividing issue gonna take sides politically?
Which dividing issue? Aaron O'Toole being gone?
Yeah, that dividing issue, is that going to divide the Conservative Party, or are they going to unite under one specific message, and we'll have a division between our liberal and conservative viewpoints in this country?
Well, I don't think him being ousted is going to divide the party. I think it's a sign that the party is starting to divide on its own. He was ousted because he ran as a true blue to get the position, and then he definitely changed his viewpoints somewhat once he became leader. Now, I don't disagree with the shift that he made, because he made a shift that if the party would get behind it, it's much more likely to get them into power in Canada today than the sort of true blue mentality, as they keep calling it.
And what shift is that specifically?
A shift towards the center, toward being more accepting of, for example, like, LGBTQ, acknowledging climate change, stuff that generally the more left-leaning policy parties are more likely to acknowledge. And Aaron O'Toole definitely had the idea that for the Conservatives to take power today in Canada, they need to modernize and become more on board with several of these ideas. And but unfortunately, he often was flip-flopping on things he would say. He would say something, the next day he would be correcting it or just straight saying the opposite. And historically, with more right-leaning voters, you lose them when you do something like that, and you can't get them back.
That's true. Conservatives have a specific value system, and they usually stand by those values. And flip-flopping was the main issue I heard from a lot of reporters that went out and asked conservative-minded individuals at these Freedom Convoy, and they just said he had no spine, that guy. And I mean, I somewhat agreed with you because, I think I totally agree with you at this point, because I heard his message when he was trying to become leader, and I decided, I'm going to buy a membership and vote for this Aaron O'Toole as the Conservative leader, because he did take a good shift, and he did decide on a specific green policy that was not quite a carbon tax, but eventually, when he became leader and he was running against the Liberals, he just ended up adopting basically liberal policies out in a lighter version. And that was the flip-flopping that basically told him, when he didn't win that election, told conservatives that didn't work, and we need a leader who will stand strong on specific principles.
And who is that leader?
We will find out probably by the next time we have a discussion. We will have a better understanding. Right now, a lot of people are enjoying Pierre Poilievre. Maybe it will be him.
Maybe.
If he decides to run. He didn't decide to run for some reason. I wanted to ask you guys, if it does come down to conservatives standing more towards a freedom-based mentality and getting back to the lifestyle we had before the pandemic, and the Liberals continuing to say that this pandemic is what's really the destroying society and not their mandates and policies that are. Well, Michael Lee, I did see a couple of polls, and I'm going to ask you to bring up one of them. The first one is...
So you're talking about the poll that shows Canadians split over truckers' protest.
That's right. Whether individuals identify with the Liberal or Conservative Party, both groups disapprove of how their parties have addressed the convoy so far. So this Western Standard article actually goes to point out a couple of polls that was done by, I can't remember, let's scroll down here, Michael Lee, to Innovative Research Group. That was the group that did the polling, and they asked a few questions, and it's very interesting. They're showing here that support is highest among those paying very close attention. So yeah, 43% of the people who are paying very close attention, they strongly support the truckers. And obviously 34% here on the opposite side, people who are not paying attention, or they're paying attention very closely. 34% of them disagree. When we go down to the lower portions of this poll that are stating people who either somewhat closely, not very closely, or not at all closely are paying attention, it seems that people who strongly oppose are still somewhat in the same percentile. It goes from 34% to 28%. Whereas it seems like what we're seeing here, people who are likely to support the truckers are strongly in support if they actually understand what the protest is about, and a little more muddled in their opinions, probably because of how we've heard about it in the news.
Could it be that our news media is reporting on this with somewhat of a slant? Say it ain't so.
Yeah. So, well, the best point to put attention to is people who are actually paying a close attention. Those people really agree. I don't know how that transports to the larger population and how that affects. I have another poll that we should actually pull up afterwards too. It's a poll that was done a few days before the Saturday protest, and was done, I think, on the Thursday or something. So the protest, probably the trucking convoy, was definitely in force coming across the country, and people were lining the streets in showing their support. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, there's one here that shows the protest method. That nearly 47% of those paying very close attention approve of the method that truckers are protesting. So again, it kind of breaks down the way you just did, where it goes very closely, somewhat closely, not very closely, and not at all. And it breaks down basically who approves and who doesn't approve and who just doesn't know.
Yeah. And you know what? This is a specific poll in terms of asking about the truckers themselves. But the other poll I'm going to get you to pull up is restrictions in general in how Canada should proceed. So go ahead now and pull up this second one. All right, so this poll here, I forget who it was from. I think it was, Angus Reid. So that's a very reputable polling firm. It says majority of Canadians want restrictions lifted now. Angus Reid poll. So this is an interesting one. Agree versus disagree. It's time to end restrictions and let people self-isolate if they're at risk. So they're basically asking if we should allow people to provide their own restrictions rather than mandated restrictions and that. And what do we see here? January 7th to 12th, when the polling was done on those dates, people who strongly agree with lifting the restrictions was at 21%, and agree was at 19%. So that's a total of what? 40% of people agreeing that we should lift restrictions. We'll juxtapose that with about
2 weeks later.
2 weeks later,
Yep.
we are now seeing 32% of people polled strongly agreed that restrictions should be lifted, and 22%. What does that equal in the math?
54%.
54%.
The math is the math.
It is.
So we're starting. We went from 40 to a 14-point jump, and this was just about a week ago. So in another week, I bet they'll do this poll again after this convoy, where we've seen a lot of people showing their support or disapproval of restrictions and mandates publicly. So what I want to ask you guys is, now that people have been publicly stating their opinion with how they feel about restrictions, whereas we've probably been saying this in our social groups only, what do you think this polling is going to lead to in maybe the next week or so if they do this type of poll again? Do you guys feel that we'll see another growth of people agreeing that restrictions should start to be lifted?
Well, listen, obviously this 50+% of people here are just a fringe group who are here to cause trouble and be Nazis.
I don't think that's the case, but
I think that, in honesty, those numbers are just going to continue to increase, because people have come to terms with the world we live in and the pandemic that is happening in it, and it's also being described in a lot of places now as saying that it's moving to be endemic, and we can't just be restricting things and mandating things indefinitely without some kind of a plan to return to sort of normal daily operation.
Yes, I'm gonna ask Michael Lee to pull up one more thing, and
He's not gonna like that.
He's getting a pull-up workout. He's gonna have huge traps, and that is from our newly elected interim leader of the Conservative Party, Candice Bergen.
Candice Bergen.
Yeah, from Portage.
From right here in Manitoba.
She, in the House of Commons, started to show some kind of support for the dialogue, and I'm just gonna ask you to pull it up now. Pull it up now. How lovely. We have a new leader. A strong female leader.
Thank you.
For now.
That's very, very kind, and I appreciate that support. Mr. Speaker, the protesters, and I guess we should be more accurate, the trucks have been parked outside in Ottawa for almost a week now. And instead of presenting a plan, which is what I think a lot of people in this country would like to see, instead of presenting a plan to work with the people who are out there to help them feel that they've been listened to, the Prime Minister is threatening Canadians with more vaccine mandates for interprovincial trade and travel. This is not helpful. So can the Prime Minister please tell Canadians what role he feels the government can play and what they can do to help solve the impasse? Thank you.
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, allow me to first congratulate the member for Portage Lisbon on her election as interim leader of her party. It is great to see another strong Western woman leading the official opposition. And allow me to thank the member for Durham and his family for their public service.
And that should go
I
on.
got to know him during his time
to not
as the
answer
official opposition's
the
critic
question
for foreign affairs, and
that was
I know
directly
he is a
asked
strong advocate
of
for
the
his
other leader.
community and for Canada.
How unusual.
When it comes to the ongoing protests, I and all of our government clearly condemn the desecration of national monuments and the display of hateful symbols that this protest has tolerated.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, and I appreciate the Deputy Minister's kind words, and maybe all the horns have affected her hearing because I don't know if she heard my question, so I'm going to ask it again. Where is the olive branch? Because Canadians are looking for an olive branch, and I appreciate the olive branch she just extended to me right now. And I think that's what Canadians are looking for. Yes. The government doesn't have to agree. They don't have to even like the protesters and the trucks that are parked outside, but they need to provide a solution. So could they please tell Canadians what the solution is to get past this impasse?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Maybe we'll get an answer this time.
Speaker, my hearing is just fine. And yesterday, I heard very clearly my colleague from Hull, Elmer, who explained what it means for a Black Canadian to see swastikas and the Confederate flag displayed at a protest in our nation's capital.
That's our leadership.
He told us how that horrible emblem makes Black Canadians question who else among us would infringe on their equality and freedom. His words are a powerful reminder that every member of this House has a responsibility to speak out against a movement that tolerates such symbols.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
But where's she bringing up
Mr.
Black
Speaker,
Canadians?
that I'm afraid is classic gaslighting, and it's very disappointing to see the Deputy Leader do that when we are in the middle of what's going on the streets right now in Ottawa. There's nobody in this House that tolerates racism. There's nobody in this House that accepts, Mr. Speaker, wearing a blackface, etc. We do not need to go through the litany of racist things that have been done by people who clearly had very poor judgment. But that isn't what we are talking about. We are talking about an impasse on Parliament Hill. We need to have some solution. There needs to be an olive branch. Where is that? Thank you.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite has just used the bad apple. She's excused the desecration of the national monuments and the display of the swastika and the Confederate flag.
This is disappointing.
Yeah, no kidding. It's just going in circles.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, we tell our children that when they see a bully, even if that bully is their friend, their job is to speak out. It is our job, Mr. Speaker, as members of this House, to speak out against these hateful actions.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Disappointing answer, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, the Prime Minister's policy is causing the price of everything to soar, but he smugly brushes that away, just like he brushes away most every other challenge that Canadians are facing. He looks at single moms, for example, who are struggling and seems to smugly not understand they're just trying to put nutritional food on their kids' plates. He looks at families who are trying to pay the rent. Does he understand how difficult rent is to pay right now? The rent is soaring. What's the Prime Minister's plan to stop the runaway inflation?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives continue to irresponsibly push a false economic narrative. The truth is that Canada is...
Doesn't feel false to me.
No, not at all.
Strongly recovering from
Yeah,
the
my
COVID
grocery bill
recession.
didn't feel false.
Neither did my rent.
5.4% in the third quarter. That was stronger than the US, the UK, Japan, and Australia. We've replaced 108.
Well, we can cut that there, Michael Lee. Yeah, so what I've seen there, and my takeaway from that exchange in the House of Commons is the Liberal government is just doubling down on this narrative that this protest is racist, and they're not even acknowledging what a leader should do, and have some kind of discussion or an olive branch, as Candice Bergen put it, and hopefully come to some kind of resolve that, as we've seen now, 54% of Canadians are in some agreement that we should be moving towards some other form of COVID control. I wanted to know, you guys. I mean, she's going off on inflation at the end there, but that's a topic for another another discussion.
We'll have to invite our buddy Pierre for that one.
Pierre, that's correct. What I want to ask you guys, though, is this movement is now being mentioned in the House of Commons, and do you guys think that, as I was asking earlier, this protest, is it leading to change? Are we going to see an exchange, or a change, I should say, in more laws across Canada?
Like the mandate laws?
Yeah, that's what they're asking in this protest. I know it's you guys have been convinced that it's a racist protest, but it's a anti-mandate protest where they are asking people to drop the mandates across Canada and just allow Canadians to take the risks that they want.
Well, I mean, I've been saying similar things to that for months. So,
is this protest making a change?
Is it making a change? Well, it's bringing. I imagine it's bringing awareness to some people. It would be interesting to know on that one of those graphs earlier that broke down the opinions by how closely people were following the story. It would have been interesting to know exactly what percentage of the population fell into the different groups, but I would imagine that this is now getting the attention of a much higher portion of the population, which will likely lead to at least higher numbers of people who are going to dig into this, do their own research, and start to uncover some of what we've seen here on our show today.
Well, I got to point out 3 changes that have recently occurred since this protest. We talked a week or so ago on the last episode about Quebec.
La Belle Provence.
Yeah, some were calling it La Belle Prison, but that's a different story.
I don't know French, so I'm not saying anything.
They were going to have a vax tax.
Suddenly they aren't going to have that, Josh. What's that about?
Yeah, Premier Francois Legault.
Francois
Legault has stated that they are not going forward with that due to social cohesion, is what he said.
What does that mean?
It means that people are protesting and upset, and we're seeing a lot of people protesting these ridiculous measures, and he realizes that that's not so popular.
They're cohesiving against his stupid idea.
Yeah, so that's basically what's occurring. That's one situation. A second one is in Saskatchewan. Premier Scott Moe there, he realized when the convoy rolled right through his province that there was a lot of support for this no more mandates movement. And you know what they have discussed for the end of this month?
Removing the passports.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the passports don't really achieve much at this point anyways.
They are removing a ton of restrictions. Serious restrictions like that, like mandates, like those vaccine passports that people are protesting against.
Well, even here in Manitoba, we now apparently have a plan to move forward with rolling those back.
Yeah, and the third one I was going to mention is Jason Kenney in Alberta has also mentioned a similar thing as Scott Moe.
Mr. Popular over there.
Yeah, there is changes because people are starting to realize that, you know what, this mandates and these restrictions are not really effective. There are changes on the horizon. And are we going to have a situation where we have political fight about this, or are people going to actually start looking into what is actual science and what is good policy based on that science?
This federal government is fairly spineless, and I imagine they're just basically waiting for all the provinces to start rolling everything back on their own so that they can come charging in to our, to announce they're saving us, and they've decided that it's a brilliant idea to remove restrictions themselves, and we should all be so thankful. That's my prediction.
Well, they're consistently doubling down on this narrative that this protest is super bad, probably because it is bad for their political future when people are starting to argue with the policies that they're trying to put forth. With that said, you guys, I'm going to tell you, I think that change is on the way. I told you last week when I saw this convoy rolling through, I think there's going to be a change, and I think I've been right so far, and we're going on. Not to honk my own horn, as we've heard a lot of that honking. But I'm just going to say, stay tuned to both sides of the story, and not just what the mainstream media content creators are telling us. Listen to the actual people on the ground who are hundreds of videos being provided on YouTube or whatever platform you choose to wish, Instagram or whatnot, and see what actual Canadians are saying. Don't get stuck in your echo chambers. I know for a fact that when I watched recently a At Issue, the three panelists that were on that show were stuck in an echo chamber talking about how no one's going to support these measures that the truckers have brought forth, but that doesn't seem to be the case. We've seen some political leadership change now on that front. So people who are just listening to CTV or just listening to CBC, watch those videos online and see what actual people are saying and have the actual hard conversations. Ask people that disagree with you what their opinions are and listen to them, because that's the only way we're going to move forward and actually get the social cohesion. Because we got to understand that some people are against the mandates, some people are against the actual vaccines. But either way, we can't force people to have the beliefs we have. We can only try to listen to people and create some kind of harmony.
Yeah. So until next time, do your own research, formulate your own opinions, and don't let people tell you how to think.
Well said.